you could talk about your brand really clearly and connect people to the overall story, that it didn't feel like traditional marketing. Yep.
And suddenly, you know, what they hit on in 5 seconds, oh man, it told you what you needed to know. Then you wanted to know more. Hey, it's your host, Michael Dargie. I interview a lot of people on the show, but since 2006, my creative agency has been helping artists, entrepreneurs, and businesses like yours find, shape, and share your story so everyone gets it. In April 2025, my first book is being released that goes through the method I use called Brand Jitsu. No, there's no fighting. It's not that kind of jitsu, but there is a really great and cheesy metaphor. Visit brandjitsu.com, join the list for my book, Brand Jitsu, Move Your Brand from Meh to Memorable. In this episode, you'll meet Ryan Holck and learn about the power of distilling your brand's message down to what truly matters. Ryan helps businesses find their voice through strategic storytelling and why embracing failure is a crucial part of the entrepreneurial journey. Please welcome Ryan Holck to the Rebel Rebel. Welcome to the Rebel Rebel. I'm your host, Michael Dargie, and somewhere across the universe from me is Ryan Holck. I didn't even ask how to pronounce your last name.
You nailed it. That was fantastic. That was awesome.
Thank you. Wow, that like right out of the park, just like that. So Ryan, how are you, sir?
Doing all right. Really excited to be part of speaking with your audience and talking shop about marketing and principles that'll help people's businesses move forward.
Love it. So just to sort of catch people up, you're like distillyourstory.com is where you're at, where people can find you. And we'll put all your links in the show notes and stuff like that. But before we get into what it is that you're doing now, where are you in the world?
So I am in the center of California. If you looked at a map and dropped your finger like blip in the middle of the state, you would pretty much be within a very short distance of where I live. Grew up in this area. We're like 4 hours north of LA, 3 hours from San Francisco. Hour and a half to Yosemite, if you're familiar with Yosemite and this big, huge, amazing mountain. And so, been here most of my life, spent some years in the Bay Area and Sacramento area, but came back here to raise a family in the community that we grew up in.
Wow. I love California. I always found like my people are everywhere, but I really do resonate with Californians. There's just something about that whole vibe.
Yes, very much so. Now, I will say that the California vibe is different here in the Central Valley middle part of the state than it is elsewhere. This has definitely got an ag kind of feel to it.
Okay.
A little more like places in the Midwest. So it's kind of weird to have this like belt of, this doesn't feel like California here.
Oh, okay. So it's okay. Okay, it's like ag with a hint of it's gonna sound like such a jerk thing to say. A hint of culture, West Coast culture, West Coast culture ag.
Yeah, that actually is a probably a very accurate description of this area. Yeah,
nice. Well, welcome, and from my country to yours, well done.
Thank you.
So catch us up. What is it that Distill Your Brand is all about? Like, what is it that you're doing today?
Yeah. So I started out in the nonprofit space, and I actually started as a musician of all things. Like I had this moment before college where I was like, do I do music? Do I do marketing? And I met with some graphics people, and I went and talked to some musicians, and I went, well, I've got more time in music. Let's do music. And I got into music, and I kept getting sucked into the marketing side of music. Like, hey, can you make sure people actually show up at this event? Can you like figure out how to do signage? Can you figure out? Well, I got to a point where I realized I didn't want to spend my days doing music. And frankly, I loved portions of it and hated other portions. And so I decided I'm going to try marketing. And I ended up working in a nonprofit initially, and I learned in that process some great marketing principles, but I learned the power of storytelling. And that if you could talk about your brand really clearly and connect people to the overall story, that it didn't feel like traditional marketing, and people tended to not like put their put the brakes on and walk away from you in the first 10 seconds of a conversation.
Right.
And so Distill Your Story really is the amalgamation of that, with me going, what if we took storytelling principles and we talked about businesses in a conversational and relational way, and then we put like the marketing oomph behind it of maybe we add a website, or we do pay-per-click, or we, do traditional ads, or we do print, or we add the marketing things that help reinforce a strong story to start with.
I love it. That is super cool. So I guess it behooves me to ask, and I mean, you did give us a hint of that answer, but I'd like to go back a little bit further in time. And, you talked about being a musician and being dragged into marketing, kicking and screaming. But I wonder what happened with Ryan earlier in life. Like, what does young Ryan look like on, and I don't, maybe you're jumping the Snake River Canyon in your mind on Evel Knievel motorcycle. What does this look like for you?
Yeah. So young Ryan I played the piano. That was like what I did. So I had this musical outlet that really fueled the creative side of me, but I also loved the art and doodling and sketching side of things. And I always found that I had the ability to have a conversation with someone and they could talk a long time, but what I'd walk away with was one or two sentences that really was what I thought was the core of what they were trying to say. Oh. And so it was kind of the beginning stages of, they talked a long time, but here's the two sentences that I walked away with, and me going, oh, that's actually marketing. Like if we could find a way to harness that. So even as a kid, I had some of that, but I loved to doodle and be creative and sit and sketch and do things. And my family had creatives in it. And so they understood that sometimes you just let creativity go. And other times you kind of go, maybe you should point your focus in a little more strategic, structured way where it's going to be, a better use of your time. So I had some nice parameters and guardrails, but really they allowed me to still be creative in the process.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay. All of this tracks. I love this idea of, so people talk for a long time, but then you can distill it down to the core message, which I think is so crucial. I did a talk for some students at a university in the marketing program, and they had to do their pitch. So it was like the art of the pitch kind of thing.
Okay.
And they came up and it was like 5 minutes of pitching. I'm just like, okay, great. One of you get up there. You have 30 seconds, go. So they went up there and they did their pitch in 30 seconds. Then I was like, great. I grabbed another one from the group. I said, you get 20 seconds. Tell us your pitch. Then I grabbed another one. I'm just like, you get 10 seconds. Tell us the pitch. Then the last person, I'm like, you got 5 seconds. What's the pitch? And what I found during the course of that was this narrowing of focus and the removal of extraneous words.
Yep.
And suddenly, what they hit on in 5 seconds. Oh man, I told you what you needed to know. Then you wanted to know more.
Yes, exactly. And for me, that then is where, if I can connect a story to it, that's going to like drive that home and actually be memorable, because I may not remember your pitch, but I probably will remember some aspect of a story you connect to it.
Sure. So particularly if somehow you allow me to be part of that story.
Exactly. If I can engage you with it and you connect, then it's a different thing.
Oh, outstanding. Oh, I love it. So, let's go here. So you're middle California.
Yeah.
What does like a typical Ryan day look like? Or is there such a thing?
So I would say that for years there was a very typical Ryan day, and that has drastically changed in the last year and a half, or really since post-COVID. For years, I was the guy who sat in the hot seat creating all the deliverables. Like, I'm here 50 hours a week in Photoshop and InDesign and hacking web code and doing that kind of stuff. Yeah. And in the midst of COVID, I really realized that my sweet spot was the strategic side of that story process more so than the deliverable side. And so where I used to spend, hours inside of Adobe, I'm now spending more time doing networking and making connections and having more high level conversations with businesses about like, let's get the whiteboard out and figure out how are we going to how are we going to frame all the goals and then build a plan, backfill a plan, rather than just throwing marketing at it and hoping it somehow magically works.
Oh, you're speaking my language. It would be so great to never look at Adobe again.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would.
Love you, Adobe, but oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my. Okay.
And I should say, I loved that part. Like
Sure.
it fueled me for years and years and years. And honestly, I had a moment where I created something and I looked at it and I went, it works. But is this the best I could offer this client?
Right.
Like if I had someone else on the team do this and they got the best of me, I think at the end of the day, they would be in a better place. And that was the moment for me where I went, I have to get out of the hot seat as the deliverables guy. And I've got to be in the strategy seat, because that's where I really offer the most to the conversation.
Oh, that's very cool to know. Also, I imagine a very scary thing to do.
It's been a very scary thing. And COVID actually kind of blew the thing up, because COVID was like, hey, nobody wants to pay for strategy. They just got to get the job done. It's definitely proved to be a fun transition.
Good for you. Oh, that's so great. So speaking of, you had this amazing picture behind you. It looks like autumn in the Sierras.
Yes.
And maybe it's not the Sierras. I'm not sure.
This is actually Yosemite. That is Half Dome.
Oh, okay.
And this is the river that runs through the valley of Yosemite. This is actually a picture taken by my dad, who in retirement went back to photography and is now a landscape photographer.
Wow.
And so, he and I have sat on this shoreline 3 or 4 different seasons out of the year and taken similar shots. And this one really speaks, in my opinion, to the feel of this area, and just in a great way that I've never gotten my own shot of. So,
wow. Well, so this just leads me to ask this question, because it popped into my head recently, and I didn't grow up on the West Coast.
Yeah.
But my parents grew up on the West Coast, and we always used to vacation on the West Coast. And in my heart of hearts, I'm a West Coast human. Like I feel my most authentic self there. However, having said that, I was born in Calgary, raised in Toronto, came back to Calgary. And I feel an affinity to Calgary in a way that I know that I'm home, but it doesn't charge me. Anyway, the point I'm chasing down here is there a soul's home in a location for you? Like, is there a place where you feel most Ryan?
Yeah, very much so here in this community. I am 15 miles from the house I grew up in, 15 miles from the house my parents have lived in for the last 15, 20 years.
Wow.
Now we're technically a community north, but we're still that close to proximity. Yeah. And so this very much is home. When we looked at each other and went, okay, it's time to start a family. Now's our chance to go home. And so we actually started looking for jobs at that point, because I wasn't working for myself yet, of what would bring us closer to home. Maybe not to the same community, but at least closer than hours away.
Wow.
And so growing up, our family, our immediate family, all of our relatives lived out of the area. And so our core was very centralized and very strong. And my wife's family was very similar. Like they all lived within 3 minutes of each other. And so we knew when the kids are growing and when we've got a family, we want that proximity, because we loved our family, but I did not have the ability to drive down the street and find grandma and grandpa or find my aunts and uncles. It just didn't happen that way. Right. So really this has been home for us in a lot of ways.
Wow. Do you find that, and this is maybe a personal question, but do you find that you live your life on purpose, or have you lived it sort of somewhat by accident? Like, have things just sort of occurred and you've gotten there, or did you plan all of this?
I would say that it was strategic falling forward. In that we had like this the driving force in our life has always been, we want to live a life that impacts others. Now, that has looked like a lot of things. That's looked like me working in a nonprofit where I'm serving people in a very specific way. That's me working with small businesses who are trying to figure out how to make the world better. That's me serving for-profits who are creating products for nonprofits. So it's looked different ways. And one of our life things has been then, how do we raise kids? How do we raise a family that impact is always goes beyond our household? And so that part has been strategic and intentional. Like, we want this to be part of us.
Yeah.
How it has fleshed out, I never dreamt I would own an agency. I never dreamt I'd work for myself. In hindsight, I can't imagine I lasted as long as I did working for others.
Oh,
because I realize now that I'm 50 and I look back and I'm like, I'm not sure I was a great employee. Mm. Not because I didn't play by the rules and get work done, but because I tend to ask questions and push people sometimes in ways that they'd rather not be pushed. And for some leaders, that was a challenge.
Oh, interesting. Huh. Hi.
Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, 100% it does.
Okay.
Like that tracks completely. And I think I love this idea of, maybe you weren't a good employee, but I think that maybe you didn't have the right boss, if that's even a thing, or maybe you're just not wired that way. And I think that's a cool thing to know.
Yeah. Well, I would say this, that I had a number of bosses that weren't great. I actually was thinking about this earlier today. They were just challenging. And part of it was challenging interpersonally. Part of it was, there was things about their leadership that excelled in things that were gaps. And those gaps aligned with places I needed someone to help push me.
Right.
But I worked at a nonprofit in the hot seat as the design and communications guy. I had a boss who pretty much free game said, if you can dream it and we can justify how to do it, we can pursue this dream. And so there was a level, like, our creative team was phenomenal because we felt like we had that Disney blue sky open door. Let's dream. Wow. We may not be able to fund it. It may not work, but we can dream about it. And let's find creative ways to address these problems and these issues to get people to show up to, whatever we were promoting. And so I definitely had both sides of the equation. And I would say on the creative side, they held that group of creatives with loose hands because we all kind of had that, where we think a little different. We process a little different kind of approach to life. But definitely it does come down to having the right leader.
Oh, and so do you have people that work for you?
I have contractors that I work with.
Love it. Okay. If you were to put on your leader hat and to lead these contractors, how do you stack up?
That's a great question, because I've been wondering that myself recently, because I've been more reflective of how was I as a worker.
Yeah.
I would say that I acknowledge the need to give people free rein in their creativity. Like, let's have a little bit of leeway. Where I struggle is that I am looking at the goal line and thinking, I know what it takes to get there. At this pace, we're going to struggle sometimes to reach the goal in the timeline allotted by the client. And so my tension has been, how do I allow creativity to happen and not squash it, but at the same time, without having to live in a sauna, keep things on the rails? And so that has been the biggest challenge for me when I had team, in a nonprofit setting, or I've got contractor team, is just keeping those pieces on the rails.
Yeah. Interesting. I find that sometimes, whether it's deadlines or whether it's, external pressure, sometimes is the best crucible for creativity, because the creativity can be such a big thing. Like, how do we tell this story? Well, suddenly if you tighten up the guardrails, you've got to come up with an answer.
Right. And so that has been the tension, because I often create best in those last 40% of the time period for a project.
Yeah.
But I also know, for me, the initial part oftentimes gives the creativity that allows for that final 40% to deliver at volume or at quality. Yeah. So, but finding that is, and that's honestly part of the challenge that I've had with contractors, is I can't go next door into the office. I can't, I'm not going to micromanage you, because I hated when people did that to me. Yeah. So how do you go in this touch point at the beginning of the week? How do we make sure we stay on the rails so that by Thursday I'm actually getting what I need from you, and we feel like, it's a congruent kind of relationship? And that part has been growth. And I would say that I definitely don't feel like I've nailed that yet.
Work in progress, man.
Yeah.
Well, good for you though, to figure that out and be moving forward. What is it that takes, what creates a good story, a good brand story?
The biggest thing for me is that there has to be the acknowledgement of some sort of tension that we're actually solving. If you look at movies, they're all about the hero's journey and what are they fighting against and things. And I find that for a lot of brands, that complicates things at a level. They're like, I don't get it. I'm like, tell me this. What do you do? What problem do you serve? How do you solve it? Yeah. And I'm amazed by the number of businesses who can't clearly articulate, here's actually what we solve. We have this great widget, but here's how is it making people's life better? And they're like, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I've ever thought about that. And all of a sudden I go, oh, okay. That's shocking. Why the hero section on your website is a history of the company and doesn't tell me in 2 sentences why I need to buy your product. And so for me, the biggest thing is I want to know, and this really is, you told your story about your 30 seconds, you gave them 20 seconds, 5, 10 seconds. I want to know in 2 sentences or less, who is this audience? How do you solve their problem? And what is the win? If you can't do that in 2 sentences, we're going to have a tension when it comes to telling the larger story, because I can't then go look for a customer you've served who you fixed that problem for, who I can do a 30-second TV spot for, or who I could go interview, who I can go get a testimonial from. And that's the tension for me, is figuring out. And a lot of the work I do is sitting and going, let's document this stuff, because you've never sat and documented the simple things in your business.
Wow. That's outstanding. That's really good. Thank you.
I have this process, and I call it the golden egg process. And my business coach is like, I hate that title. You got to come up with a better title. But it essentially is that a lot of businesses, we spend time promoting and talking about the products and services in our business that bring in 10% of the revenue, instead of focusing our thoughts and attention on the top 1 or 2 things that bring in 80 to 90% of the revenue. And that if we just told those stories at volume, we would make enough that we probably didn't have to offer those other things that made up the difference.
Why do you think companies don't do that?
I think companies struggle with it because we have this, I've got to be all things, and I created this widget and I don't want it to ever die.
Yeah, ego is the enemy.
Ego is the enemy, and there's this, we're emotionally connected to it, or if we're a generational company, someone had input into this who maybe isn't a part of the company anymore, and we feel like we owe something to it. Or I've never done the work and looked at my books to tell you what the top 2 producers in my company are.
Oh.
Like, I know all things combined, we do this amount of volume every year. I couldn't tell you that 50% is product 1 and 30% is product 2, and the other 4 products all do the last 20. And so all of a sudden my message is going all these places rather than I have 2 stories. If I only told the top 2 stories, man, we'd be so clear. Customers would be like, game on. This is what we want.
Interesting. Oh, okay. It inspires so many questions in my head, because this is certainly a passion area of mine. And I wonder though, if like those four items that, you know, account for 20%, if those aren't also part of the story, if you took those away, would that impact the bigger sell, or the, you know what I mean? Like,
yes. And that is the tension. Like, I think of a company like Procter and Gamble, or, you know, one of those companies that has like 100 different brands, you know, and, you know, they got cleaning supplies, they've got deodorant, they've got, you know, all sorts of things when you walk down the aisle at the supermarket. Well, if they did away with an entire product brand, it would kind of feel weird, and it's like they'd leave a hole. But so much of our time, it isn't that the product has to completely disappear. It just may not be the item that sits on the front 2 pages of our website anymore. Right. Yeah, it may be, or it's part of the bigger picture. And yes, it's still a product or service, but like, do you ever see Frito-Lay advertising Funyuns? Never. They just sit on the shelf and people buy them.
Right.
Well, why? Because people buy Cheetos, and they buy Lay's potato chips, and they buy the barbecue, and like, those are the top sellers. So they put all their ad dollar, all their real estate in terms of advertising storytelling into those top items. They didn't stop selling the other. They just stopped putting ad spend and revenue time from the team into advertising and promoting those the same way.
Right. Because you're getting the customer to that rack.
Yes.
To buy something, and they might choose the next option.
Exactly. So I think that's as much part of it for a business, but especially when you've got, I serve a lot of businesses who are sub $2 million. Okay. So at sub $2 million, you typically have a small product line. Your team is fairly small. You don't necessarily have an internal marketing communication. There's no CMO usually, or they're right at the edge of going, maybe I need one. So what you do when your ad spend is very focused, you've got to know, we've got to only talk about a few things. Yeah. So at that point, if you aren't talking about the 2 or 3 most important things at volume and almost at nauseum for people, then you're going to lose your potential market share. And so that really is, for me, why it's so important that it's okay to offer them, but you better be talking about the most important things, because that's who's going to bring people into your circle. And then they're going to go, oh, they got some cool other products. Maybe I want those too.
What do you feel about people who market by, we have 85 years of combined experience in this area? We have 125 years of combined experience. Talk to me about that.
So guilty as charged. So I say that because there's a fine line, and I went back and forth with a friend actually yesterday on LinkedIn about this.
Okay.
Is that there is a tension with, I want to know that you as a business owner, you as a business in general, have some experience and authority. I want that to be a little part of the story. It's not going to be in the first 2 sections of your website, but I want there to be something that says, I do know what I'm doing. I've helped others do this. I can help you too. So I want to hear a little of that. Where I think the challenge lies is that we go from 2 sentences that tell it, which is all that's necessary, to 3 paragraphs that tell about cousin Joe, who moved here from the Northwest and did all these things. And all of a sudden there was this nifty widget. Well, that may work in some settings. It may work on a reality TV show. I mean, honestly, Duck Dynasty, for instance, shares a lot of stuff and details about the history where I'm like, this would never work in print. It would never work on a website. It works because it's conversational and it's TV. But when you bring that into how most people are going to engage with you and hear your story online, they're going to see it in social. They're going to like, that's too much information for that kind of setting.
Yeah.
So I say guilty as charged because I've done it several times recently where I'm like, tell me what the combined, especially if it's a brand new company who has an experienced team, but the product or service line is new. There's a part of me that wants to say the four of us have 120 years experience in this industry, but that's not going to be a long-term story I want to have told.
Yeah.
You know, but I do want people to know we've at least been around a few times. The product may be new, but the rest, you know, we've been doing this for 30 years. I'm working with an ag company right now. They have a brand new product that released this last year. They needed people it was done under a brand new brand label. They did not want it under their existing label. And we had that tension of how do we talk about this in a way that says this is created by people who've been doing this for 4 decades without saying who the 4 people were because they were connected to another brand.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Let's imagine for a second that you're in your picture behind you.
Yeah.
And you're walking along that river's edge. And you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, Ryan," you say to yourself, "I really wish the world knew this one thing." What is the one thing that you wish the world knew?
I wish that the world realized the importance of curating your own story well, of being able to articulate it clearly enough that others could remember it and repeat some micro version of it back to you.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Very nice. What is a Ryan guilty pleasure? What does Ryan do just for Ryan?
I am not good at this. At any level. For years, the guilty pleasure was that 1 week a year, I would get in an inner tube with a fly rod and fish. Like out on not on a stream, but in a lake with a fly rod. And there was blessings and curses to that kind of vacation. Yeah. There's a lot of relaxation, but there's a moment where it's too much quiet for me. And I go, we got to go do something else now.
Okay.
But really it was an opportunity it is so unlike my day to day. There is no computer. There is no checking email. You don't have great phone service. I'm sitting here in nature. There's birds overhead and we're just enjoying having a rod in the water.
Love it. Okay, so that begs the question.
Yeah.
Are you the guy that wants a fish on that hook or the guy that doesn't want a fish ever to hit that hook?
I want fish on that hook with regularity, but I am not going to keep a single one because I do not want to eat them. As kids, we got to the point where we had 100+ trout in our freezer at one point because we were catching so many every time we went. And we finally... my mom was an amazing cook and she got so creative and we finally said, we're going to stop bringing them home because we don't want to ever eat fish again. I love the opportunity to be out there, the experience of catching the fish, but man, I want that fish back in the water and I'm going to try it for another one.
Oh, I love it. Where's your happy place?
My happy place is actually with my family. And I feel incredibly blessed in that we have a relationship with our girls, relationship as a couple where we want to be in each other's presence and we want to spend time together. And so our oldest is getting married this summer. That's going to definitely change. But at the same time, even her fiance has realized I like being here. And I know he's not going to today, but oftentimes on a Friday, the front door will unlock about 3:30 when he's done from work. And he just rambles in, hangs out for half an hour, and then goes on to whatever the rest of his afternoon is, because he knows it's a place that he can hang out and be connected and say hi and then go on to whatever. So really the happy place is family.
Love that. Love that. What's your, this is such a random, low bar question, but what's your favorite movie? If you had to pick one.
Oh man.
I mean, it could be top 5, but like, what's one that you go back to?
I have watched a number of Marvel movies more times than I want to admit to. I am notorious for starting a movie and watching the first 10 minutes and waking up in the last 5 as it's all coming to a close. My wife is like, why are you starting a movie? Like, cause I want to, just cause you want to nap. Like, why are we starting a movie right now?
Yeah.
I've been going back and rewatching all the Star Wars films.
Oh, nice.
And really kind of re-engaging with those, and thinking more about like the story arc and how are they telling stories, and how did they essentially retell the same story multiple times in different sagas.
Right.
I love the Indiana Jones stuff. I'm all about action. Jason Bourne movies, that's one where we have watched.
So good.
So I love the action sequence scene part of it, but I also love that it's familiar enough that if I walk out of the room, I don't feel like I missed anything because I've seen it so many times. So
was it Bourne Identity? Which one was the one with, oh God, who was it? It wasn't Matt Damon.
Oh yeah. That was,
what was that
with Hawkeye.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I loved. And Jeremy Renner. And I was like, Legacy. Yeah. Yeah. And it was a weird thing because I loved the Jason Bourne franchise, like love. And then that one came out and I ignored it for like the longest time because I'm just like, that's not Jason Bourne. Right. But when I watched it, I was just like, oh, damn. Like, that is good.
And that's probably the one we've seen the least.
Yeah.
But it is, I really do enjoy that. And I actually go back and quote Jason Bourne movies. Like when there are quotes that run through your head, Jason Bourne movies is one of those that I'm like, why did that quote? Where did that? Wow, that was okay. And they're not always in positive context. Like, oh, okay. Well, that was random, but all right.
All right. So. What's Ryan's comfort food? Just a little rapid fire.
Potato chips.
Oh, okay. Which kind?
So usually
there's layers to this question.
There are layers to this question. I like the salty and buttery ones. So usually like Ruffles or the Ridges, Frito-Lay ones. We got into some kettle chips recently that I was half a bag in. And I was like, oh, I need to stop this.
Yeah, you're cutting ear holes on the bag and just.
Yes.
Okay. I love that. Oh my God. Okay. Let's go here. This has been so fun. There's these people and you know, like you've got your own thing going on. You did work for nonprofits. You've worked for companies. You started your own agency. There's these people out there. We call them rebels in waiting who are just about to embark on their own adventure, or they've already stepped off the cliff and they're in it and they're like, what did I do?
Yeah.
What advice do you give to those people, these rebels in waiting, to navigate these waters?
Give yourself the freedom to fail and to fail often and frequently, and recognize that is not personally on you. It is part of the process. And that the only way you are truly going to discover who you best fit and serve is if you continue in the process. If I told you the number of products and services that I launched and cut loose and let go of, it's almost embarrassing to look at the list and to look at the domain names that I own for things that I was like, burn it to the ground. But I look back and I go, what I learned something in that process that now is part of a course that I put together, or I reworked content I created 10 years ago to put into something that is brand new that I've launched in the last 6 months. And it's because it's part of the process. Like I may have struggled in the launch, struggled in getting people, but I learned incredible lessons from a management and marketing side that have allowed me then to turn around and make new products to serve different people out of it.
Oh, Ryan, that is heavy. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That is kick-ass. This has been such a wonderful way to spend time, Ryan. There's so many nuggets in here, and I love that nobody loves failure, but I love failure. I do. I think that if you're not failing at something and learning from it and trying a new thing, then you're going to be stuck repeating the same patterns.
Yes.
So I love that you hit us with that. Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been fantastic.
Hey, it's me again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you're an artist, entrepreneur, or business owner who believes your brand could be more than it is, head over to brandjitsu.com and join the list to get your copy of my book, Brand Jitsu, Move Your Brand from Meh to Memorable. I've been your host, Michael Dargie, and this has been the RebelRebel Podcast. It's a podcast for creative rebels and entrepreneurs all over the world. And hey, if you're a rebel or you know a rebel, why don't you head on over to the RebelRebelPodcast.com and fill out our guest request form. Share or subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And thanks so much for listening. Until next time.